In the 1940s, you could have bought 100 chappies for 1 rand. When I was in class one, I used to buy one chappies for 10 cents. But today, you can easily pay about 1 rand for two pieces of chappies. And all this basically shows us is how much the rand has lost its purchasing power due to inflation. As consumers, we need to realize that inflation is closely linked to our income. And if chappies is going to cost us 4% more tomorrow than it does today, but our income also increases by 4% tomorrow as well, then chappies won't actually cost us any more than it did today because there has been equivalent income increase. However, if we only received a 2% raise, this means that the price of chappies is going to be more expensive due to inflation. Hi, my name is Yolanda. I'm a wealth advisor. And on this platform, I give you easy, actionable tips, content, and strategies that you can use to manage money well, to live abundantly, and build generational wealth. And this episode is brought to you by Retirement Bootcamp, our brand new live training happening in Johannesburg this November. Visit our website for tickets. Wealth. And today we're talking about inflation, trying to give you some links between inflation and interest rates, and it's the silent tax. And not a lot of people understand it. So that's what we're doing in this session. So why does inflation happen? Should we worry if it does? A government tracks inflation obsessively. And they do, at times, try to keep it in a 3 to 6% range. And there's plenty of data to collect about inflation. And they can pretty much say very accurately what the inflation rate is going to be. Is it on track for 3%? Or is it like it is now at 7.6% at the time of recording this video? And in historical terms, I mean, this is basically a new phenomenon, maybe in the last 400-500 years or so, when inflation has become a concern. So back in the day, the Spanish Empire essentially collapsed because of inflation, and they didn't even know it was occurring. So in the late 15th, 16th century or so, there was an influx of precious metals, from the New World, South America, Mexico, even parts of the Far East. These precious metals flooded Europe, and specifically with the Spanish, they brought silver from the New World into Europe. They traded with European partners for their goods and services in Europe, but they didn't quite have a handle on the flow of the silver. They were just spending and spending, and eventually silver became very popular. It was flooded into the market, and thus sort of devalued the silver over time. So at that time, the monetary system was based on precious metals and specifically silver. And this boom led to the low value of this metal, resulting in inflation. So inflation basically spread to other countries in Europe and resulted in price increases by almost sixfold. So the monetary system at that time was determined by silver, and people chose to go another route of using a different kind of metal. So over time, we find governments really becoming obsessed with inflation, and we see the United States now at soaring levels that they haven't seen in about 30, 40 years in their country. So why does it happen? What makes it happen? Well, basically, there are three reasons. And the first one is what economists call the cost push inflation. This is where the cost of business rises and are then passed on to customers. Now, there could be many reasons for this, mainly raw materials increasing, such as oil, such as gas, such as electricity, coal, or it could be because workers are asking for money. And we find the unions specifically in South Africa taking the lead on this because they're very well organized. The second kind of inflation is called demand inflation. And this is where there's an increase in the number of people that want the goods and services in supply, and the supply just can't meet the demand. And obviously, with the rules of supply and demand, the prices go up. Similarly, a falling interest rate may cause short-term pleasure. As we saw during the lockdown, interest rates were low. Everybody borrowed, bought nice cars, upgraded their homes. And it caused long-term inflationary pressure as well because there was more money circulating in the system. So if interest rates on loans or home finance fall, we become tempted to take out the loan and to buy the things that we can't afford. by paying cash. Okay, so if there is solid demand, for example, with cars and houses, then the prices would naturally pick up. If banks and government inject more cash into the economy, people will have more money to spend. But in essence, they're all chasing the same number of goods as before, which means demand is going to rise. The third classic cause of inflation, we don't really have this problem in South Africa, is money printing. Now, there's a deep logic behind this idea. It can be kind of criminal because, I mean, you and I won't have a say in this. And usually with quantitative easing, aka money printing, it's usually the people at the top that get the first round of funds, tenderpreneurs, corrupt politicians. They are the ones that will benefit. And by the time it comes down to us, that money is devalued. And that is why it's scary when there's talk of nationalizing the Reserve Bank. It's my feeling, it's my opinion that the nationalization of the Reserve Bank would come. And maybe sometime after that nationalization, quantitative easing will come about. So printing money increases the number of notes in circulation. So all these cases amount to more money in circulation, and this increase is a huge problem. So a bit of inflation can grow the economy, but it's not a very scientific, proven, guaranteed idea when it comes to that. And the argument doesn't really matter if prices go up 10% every year, and if wages go up by 15%, I mean, we all benefit, right? We can buy more things, and we are growing faster than the rate of inflation. Deliberate government-led inflation can be a mechanism for growing the economy, but it's a very, very risky move, and it has backfired in the past. So why is inflation such a problem? The problem is that it doesn't inflate at the same rate at the same time. So if everything went up 100% a year, and so did everybody's income, I mean, no problem, we would be fine. But things don't actually work that way. In South Africa, maybe we have education inflation at around 9%, health inflation at around 8%. And then within the food segment itself, you find alcohol raising at a certain price. Meat will raise at a certain price. Rising inflation rates are kind of diminishing when you're somebody who's a saver, because those inflation rates are just wiping out the money that you're saving. It's wiping out the buying power that you have. Inflation reflects its instability in the world and of life itself, because prices rise because we can't keep this complex system of the economy under control. I mean, there's just so many things happening at one time. There's wars, there's corruption, there's droughts, there's political instability, there's high taxes, there's low taxes, there's exchange rates, there's cryptocurrency. There's so many facets that impact the economy, and all making its mark on inflation. Closely linked to inflation rates are interest rates. And when the South African Reserve Bank raises interest rates, it's big news. And everybody's hating on the banks, but what they're really trying to do is pull down inflation, and they do that by raising the interest rates. And we're in for a couple of more rises to bring down. We're at a very high rate of inflation right now, so the Reserve Bank is going to be hiking the interest rate. And when that happens, it sends ripples through the economy. You can sink consumer confidence. That's happening now. We see retail spend is really low. It results in fewer jobs, and that's something that we struggle on a normal day. Okay, so rising interest rates just doesn't help our cause here, because we're seeing fewer jobs, lower wages. This can cause share prices to fall as well. And if they go too far, too fast, it can tip the economy into recession. So why does the Reserve Bank raise interest rates? So let's start with the basics. All right, if you borrow money, you'll have to pay back a little extra to make it worthwhile for the lender. Okay, so if you are a good, trustworthy person, you're making your payments on time, you're going to get a pretty decent interest rate. But if you don't, you might not get a good interest rate. It might be a little bit higher, so it depends on your personal risk. But if you are somebody who's saving in interest-bearing investments, you want the highest rate possible. But we all are working on the one interest rate, right? And we all trying to make money or not lose as much money based on this one rate. See it as a reward for leaving money in your account. But the size of the reward depends on the circumstances. And we have tons of banks in South Africa, all of which have different levels of lending. So it's important for you to go and do your homework when it comes to the rate of borrowing, or even if you're somebody who chooses bank investments, You got to keep on checking where you're going to get the best rate. So the South African Reserve Bank is like the bank for banks. We can't do business with the Reserve Bank as an individual. And the Reserve Bank, they have this mandate to literally control inflation. And their target range is around 3 to 6%. So most people have their home finances in South Africa with variable interest rates. And if you got a variable rate where the interest is linked to the central bank interest rate, then high interest rates mean that you're paying more on that home finance, and lower interest rates obviously means that you're spending less. But because you're going to be paying more because the bank is raising the interest rates, you've got less money to spend elsewhere, less on eating out, less on doing fun stuff that you like to do with your friends, with your family. So less spare cash means households will be spending less, businesses will be spending less. They'll be wary of making price rises in terms of their goods and their services. And this ideally should be lowering inflation because less money is changing hands. When interest rates rise, then business will find it more expensive to borrow and to invest, to expand their businesses. And this generally means less economic activity. It might mean fewer jobs, less wages, less money for households, and it's a whole cycle of things, including consumer confidence, which suffers during this time. If inflation stays very high for too long, it's a problem as well, because higher prices means employees need higher wages. You see, the unions were striking last week regarding the high cost of living, but when they demand more salaries, this also increases to inflation. So you got to know how the system works. And each of us have a role to play in this inflationary system. Rising interest rates can slow the economy right down. And the trouble is the brake pedal has a delay. And it can take as long as 2 years to see the full results from interest rate changes. And central banks know this. So when they set interest rates, they're actually trying to read not just next month or Christmas, but they're trying to read how the market would go a few years ahead. So if you want to know what investment moves you should be making in times of high inflation, check out this video.